So today we're going to be talking to you guys a little bit about first just the environment and some basic knowledge and stuff with that, then how the environment impacts us, and then we're going to go on to how you can actually make a change. Yeah.
So first of all, who are we? We're teen environmentalists who, as we said, are year 11s at the British International School of Chicago, South Loop. We're also the founders of Ecocircle and Social Justice Action.
And then outside of school, we're also members of two other organizations that are called Illinois Climate Movement. So they organize all of the strikes in Chicago, and Kinder Youth Alliance, which aims to reduce plastic use in other corporations such as Target.
And Ecocircle is our main focus today, and through Ecocircle, we encourage youth activism and educate about environmental sustainability while seeking active change in their communities to move towards a sustainable future.
So anthropogenic climate change. We like to start out with a brief definition of this because it is really important just to understand. So anthropogenic climate change is the human-related increase in greenhouse gases causing an increased rate in temperature change because of the greenhouse effect.
And throughout the history of the world, the climate has changed many times. That's natural. But there have been ice ages and warming trends. But scientists now show that we have entered a new period called the Anthropocene, age of the humans. So humans are accelerating the rate of climate change at an unseen rate. And this is due to our greenhouse gas emissions.
So I like to think of climate change as almost like a two-way street. Like if we're going to hurt the planet, it's going to hurt us back. So some of the ways that we hurt the planet is through agriculture and forestry. So that's our diet, deforestation, and different things like that. We also impact it through burning fossil fuels, through transportation, electricity and heat production, and all the other ways that are shown on the graph on the left.
So greenhouse gas emissions, some common examples of those are carbon dioxide and methane, and they basically trap the heat in the atmosphere. And some of the impacts of this is, even though it sounds small, the kind of incremental increases in temperature they talk about, if this is done globally, it can really shift things such as agriculture, it can increase floods, increase drought, all these things.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about the impacts later, but you can quickly see on the graph on the right here just a few of them. And that's how it impacts humans. So plastic. We all think about plastic pollution, but I don't think any of us really grasp how large of an issue it is. So we often think of plastic as single use, right? You use it, then you throw away. But this isn't actually true because the plastic doesn't go away. It stays in our oceans. So it's not single use.
Exactly. It's about changing your mindsets from kind of the linear way that we use products where they're produced, we use them, we throw them away, into more of a circular kind of way where they're reused, the materials are reused and recycled, or we reuse them. Because even though the statistics of it takes plastic 450 years to break down, even those statistics are very scary, when they break down, they're not breaking down in the same way that your food would break down through like composting and biodegradation. They go through this process called photodegradation. And this is basically when the plastic heats up so much in the sun that it shatters. And this process continues until they break down these things called microplastics. And microplastics are a bit of plastics that are smaller than 5 millimeters. And what's scary about this is the majority of plastic pollution is actually coming from microplastics, which we can't see. And this can cause us to ingest them, and that can lead to many health impacts, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah, and in fact, this plastic breaks down so small that it's in 90% of all bottled and tap drinking water. So we've all definitely consumed microplastics, which to me is just quite a scary thing to think about. So now your diet. So when we ask people, what do you think you do to help the environment? Typically, they don't really talk about their diet because people don't really think about it. But really, your diet is one of the biggest things that you can do to help our environment. If you look at the diagram here on the bottom left, just eating no red meat, your diet is almost as good as vegetarian or vegan. So it just really shows how big of an impact red meat specifically has. And we do want to highlight, we are not telling you to go vegan. We are not telling you to do the extremes, just sometimes thinking a bit more before you eat. So if you're at a burger place, maybe choosing a turkey burger. like that type of like little small acts that make such a big difference.
Exactly. And as it says here, the world's food system is responsible for 25% of human-generated greenhouse gas emissions, and meat and dairy alone accounts for 14.5% of the overall emissions. So that is huge. So just by thinking either not wasting as much meat, not eating excessive amounts of meat, cutting down on red meat, all these things that Chloe was saying, they can really help to make a difference and reduce your impact.
Yeah. Okay, so we don't often think about the environment as like a social justice issue, but it's actually one of the biggest ones. So the term for this is intersectional environmentalism. So intersectional environmentalism is an inclusive form of environmentalism in which both the environment and the people are protected.
And it looks at ways in which injustices happen to marginalized communities and how the earth is connected to this. An intersectional environmentalist stands with and amplifies the message of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities in addition to the planet.
And an intersectional activist needs to also consider that we can't expect someone to think about their own carbon footprint if their basic human needs are not being met because of systematic oppression. If we want people to help save the planet, we have to also help them fight the system that doesn't help them.
And to me, intersectional environmentalism is one of the most important parts of environmentalism because it really shows how the planet and society can all move forward in a sustainable, healthy way.
So next we're going to talk about why does our planet matter?
So first of all, your health. There are so many aspects of environmental damages that are in fact damaging our body. For example, air pollution. And we're going to talk about this later when we talk about environmental racism, but the closer people live to places that are emitting air pollution, such as highways, power plants, the more likely they are to develop respiratory diseases such as asthma and even lung cancer. And especially during the COVID-19 crisis, this has become especially clear, the disparities in people's lung health.
And just linking it to plastic, over the course of a meal, you're most likely consuming about 100 bits of microplastics. And so over a year, that's close to 70,000 pieces, which is insane to think about.
And plastics have a range of health impacts from leading to reproduction issues to causing cancer. So there's many different aspects. And the production of plastic obviously also contributes to air pollution because the manufacturing of it.
Okay, so how will plastic actually impact you, or not plastic, sorry, how will climate change actually impact you in your everyday life? I think we think about how it's going to impact animals and in hundreds and hundreds of years, but it's going to impact us and it's going to impact us soon. So first, it's food. So because of climate change, there'll be lower crop yields because conditions won't be optimum for growth. This means that it'll be really hard for farmers to produce their food. And also, the area in which bees can live is going to shrink because of climate change. So we'll lose access to a bunch of really great foods, such as like avocados. And then this means that we won't be able to eat these foods. And then
for example, in the US, the wheat belt is in fact going to shrink, to move north due to climate change. And this will severely impact agriculture, as Chloe was saying. And this can increase the price of foods, the quality of foods, and can even lead to increased rates of hunger.
And so secondly, climate change is also going to impact precipitation. So there's either going to be too much or too little precipitation in each place. And this is going to impact both agriculture and fresh drinking water. Number 3 is infrastructure, because destructive weather can impact transport, power sources, water sources, roads, bridges, sidewalks, prisons, highways, and more. And really, like, when you think about it, after a natural disaster, it's so hard to like get around if everything's been destroyed. So this is really how climate change is going to impact your everyday life. And then linking this kind of to like water and sanitation, if there's a natural disaster and the water facilities get destroyed, there's going to be no fresh drinking water.
Yeah, especially with flooding, that is a very big issue because especially if the rainwater gets into the sewers and it can overflow the sewers, and then all the kind of rubbish from the sewers is going to come up, and that can infiltrate into waterways, and that can increase the health risks of water and waterborne diseases. And then lastly, we have travel, and many places may be on your bucket list, but you may not be able to actually check them off. this is especially relevant to coastal areas that are slowly starting to go underwater due to rising sea levels. And the rising sea levels are attributed to many things, such as the increase in temperature due to climate change, causing glaciers and the polar ice caps to melt. And so, for example, the Maldives, every year it's going more and more underwater, and the rate of coastal erosion is increasing.
Oh, sorry. First, there's going to be some graphic images on the next slide. So if anyone wants to like look away or whatever, feel free. Okay, so animals. Climate change is really going to impact animals. And what's so sad to me is they've done nothing wrong. It's humans that have caused this, and yet they're going to pay so many of the consequences. And on the top left, you can see just a few of these ways. So, for example, habitat destruction, a loss of biodiversity, death because of plastic, wildfires.
And even just, it's not just the extreme things such as wildfires, oil spills, all of these things that are going to cause an impact on animals. It's also just that subtle change in temperature that we were talking about is happening so quickly. These animals and these plants don't actually have time to adapt to that, because adaptation and natural selection and everything happens over a very long period of time. So this is why the rate of extinction, besides there's many reasons for the increased rate of extinction due to humans, but one of the reasons is due to the biodiversity not being able to adapt, because biodiversity is especially important to keep all these ecosystems in balance. So if the balance is thrown off, that is not good.
So next is the economy. A lot of people think that climate change and like switching to renewable is actually going to harm the economy, but it's actually the opposite of that. Being eco-friendly saves your wallet too, and it benefits the economy. We need to start thinking, as George was saying before, in a more circular way. Having a more circular economy will actually benefit humans and corporations.
Exactly. And one of the reasons why people are under the impression that renewable energy is higher than fossil fuels is because fossil fuels at the moment have quite a low fixed cost, because we already have everything set up. We already have these fossil fuel plants. We already have access to everything. But they have a much higher variable cost, which is the ongoing cost compared to renewable energy. Because when you set up a renewable energy, for example, solar panels or a wind farm, the fixed cost of that is higher than fossil fuels because you're having to pay to set that up. But once that's set up, you're not having to, the sun is not charging you for its energy, the wind is not charging you for its energy. So this is a sustainable way to transition into a circular economy. And also the solar industry actually provides a lot of jobs. In the US alone, the solar industry employs more people than Google, Apple, Facebook, and Twitter combined, despite only providing approximately 2% of the US's total electricity. And in addition, in 2015, solar employment had overtaken oil and gas, as well as coal employment in the US.
So next we're going to talk about injustice and inequalities within the crisis. Climate change is not going to affect everyone the same way. It's actually a big human rights issue, even though it isn't often thought as one, because the effects of climate change are going to disproportionately impact communities around the world. So mainly affects 4 rights, among others. But the main 4, I would say, are firstly, the right to life. If there are natural disasters, people might not be able to live because of this. Right to health, because natural disasters may destroy infrastructure and other things like that, and that people might be more prone to injuries. So if they can't get adequate health care, they're missing the right to health. Right to housing, climate change will cause displacement, so more people will be homeless. And right to water and sanitation, because if, like I was saying before, if a natural disaster, for example, destroys their facilities to clean water and purify water, then these communities are going to lose access to fresh water. And these are just a few among the many rights.
And also, just to touch about the natural disasters, we're not saying that climate change will cause natural disasters. Obviously, natural disasters are already occurring, but climate change can make them more extreme and more frequent. And this is the big issue that we're facing.
So next,
So next we're going to talk about environmental racism, and that is the way that environmental hazards disproportionately impact people of color. And to elaborate, it refers to the regulations, policies, and corporate decisions that target certain communities for undesirable infrastructure and little enforcement of environmental law in these communities. This results in these areas being exposed to toxic and hazardous waste based upon their race.
So communities dominated by people of color are forced to breathe toxic air because their neighborhoods are often located near power plants and refineries. It's because of this that certain communities are experiencing higher rates of respiratory illnesses and cancers. And in fact, African Americans are 3 times more likely than the average American to die of airborne pollution. And then just kind of linking it specifically to Chicago, like where we live, there's loads of environmental racism just in one city, and it gets completely ignored. For example, 70 of our first 100 COVID-19 deaths were Black. And that is a huge issue, and it's attributed to many things, such as a lack of quality healthcare in certain neighborhoods. But climate change is also something, or not climate change, sorry, the burning of fossil fuels is also something it can be attributed to.
Because if you think about it, these power plants, these highways, they're buying property in less expensive areas, and these low-income areas typically are from certain demographics. So these certain demographics in these low-income areas are being exposed to all these pollutants in the air, and this is increasing their risk of respiratory diseases, as Chloe was saying.
So next is gender inequalities. So there are a bunch more different inequalities other than just gender and environmental racism, such as generational inequalities, indigenous inequalities. There's so many, but to me, gender was one that really kind of surprised me because I didn't think about it as much when I thought about climate change until I learned about it. So while women and girls are at the forefront of new agricultural practices, they're also left out of the conversation on decisions that'll have the greatest impact on their future, which means that their perspectives are completely ignored. Women and girls are marginalized in certain countries, which makes them more vulnerable to the effects of climate change.
And one example of this is when harvests fail, food security may be threatened, so women and girls are the last to eat. Not only this, struggling families are often forced to pull their kids out of school when these harvests fail, and it's always the girls who get pulled out first. If they're pulled out of school, they will be unable to get another job in the future due to their lack of education. So they will fall into poverty if climate change destroys their country's agricultural system. So this is not only impacting the agriculture, but it's impacting their education, which impacts their employment, which impacts the financial security in the future. So this is really pushing women and girls backwards. So this is why it's so important to address the issues of environmental sustainability so everyone can move forward together.
So next we're going to talk about taking action. So we like to kind of give a definition of sustainability. So sustainability is the quality of not being harmful to the environment or depleting natural resources, and thereby supporting long-term ecological balance.
And this is especially important to think about because what I think is the best way to be an environmental activist is just to change your mindset to be more sustainable, to think, am what I'm doing sustainable? Will this have long-term negative impacts on the environment, or will this kind of, as we keep on talking about this circular economy, using things in a circular way, can I reuse this? Can I recycle this? Can I be sustainable with this? This is one of the most important things to do as an environmental activist.
Yeah, we're not telling you to go zero waste because that can be extremely difficult. Just like George was saying, thinking more sustainably, trying to think, do I need this? Is this necessary? And that makes all the difference. So here are just a few little things that you guys can do in your daily lives to reduce your environmental footprint. So simple things like turning off the lights, reduce, reuse, and recycle, and air drying clothes instead of using a dryer.
And with food and shopping, my biggest advice with food and shopping is just think ahead. You've got to think ahead about this, what bags you need to bring, all of these things, because it's this culture of convenience that has created things such as single-use plastics. So just by thinking a bit ahead, can I bring bags? What can I do to reduce my waste? This will become a habit, and it's actually a lot easier and will save you money.
Yeah, exactly. For me, I keep a little straw in a little pouch in my backpack at all times. I never know where I'm going to be if I'm going to need a straw. So just little things like that. I've saved so many straws across the past year or so it makes a difference.
And you could memorize all these lists of tips and tricks to become more sustainable, but as we were saying before, I think the best way is just changing your mindset to see, do I need to throw this away, or can I use a reusable alternative? Just making your mindset more sustainable is the best way to change these habits.
Yeah. So what have we done? So here's just a few like brief things that we've done in our school and in our communities to be more sustainable and to help others be more sustainable. So we've given various presentations, we've introduced composting into our school, we've introduced environmental education into our school through a club that we run.
We've also done a clothing swap, which is, it's kind of like a thrift store where people bring in clothes and they swap it, because clothing is actually a large contributor to plastic pollution, because a lot of the materials that clothes are made out of is in fact plastic. So this is contributing to plastic pollution. So by reducing the amount of clothes that you're buying and reducing the need and our reliance on fast fashion, this is very good for the environment. We also had plastic water bottle ban, and just simply starting conversations about environmental sustainability. We started the student sustainability team, Ecocircle, and we've gotten involved with other organizations.
So now we want to talk about you guys. So as George was saying, we started our own club called Ecocircle, and now we want this to expand among other North Anglia schools and other schools in general. So we need you in order to do this. So we're asking you if you want to start your own Ecocircle club. And this isn't really a follow Georgia and I type of thing. This is you. This is your leadership doing what you think is right for your school. And there are a lot of good ways, like there's a lot of benefits to doing this. I mean, firstly, you're helping the world. Secondly, it's really good leadership experience. And also it is good for your university application, even though that's not the main thing.
And we'll provide you with the information, platform, advice, and tools to run your own Ecocircle within your community. So we're here to help you, but we'll be guided by you and what you think your community needs. And the good thing about what I would say is running your own organization in your community is you have control over how much you do, especially with commitment, and especially with our school does IGCSE and IB. I assume your schools have something similar. So the academic commitment can be quite a lot. But the thing about this is you can choose some weeks, oh, I'm going to work on this a lot. Some weeks, oh, I'm not going to work on this too much. Because the important thing to remember is you don't need to be a Greta Thunberg to save the environment. It's just these little things, and bringing an Ecocircle to your community can be really helpful.
Yeah, and like adding on to what George was saying is you can take it as far as you want. Like if you want to make Ecocircle a big thing in your city, if you want to be getting around to different organizations and businesses and schools and presenting, go for it. But if you want to keep it just in your school, that's okay too. So we're really like leaving this up to you guys, and we've actually prepared a little toolkit that will be shared with you if you want to start an Ecocircle. So it has everything from how to connect with us, what is Ecocircle, how to approach your school, and a lot more. So I'll just scroll through this.
And I will put the link in the chat so people can take a look at it, and this will also be put on Nord Anglia's website later. So this is just to show you how easy it can be with our help to start your own Ecocircle and to make a difference in your community. And I think the beauty per se of environmental activism is it ties into so many issues. So no matter what you're passionate about, whether it be gender inequalities, racial inequalities, all these injustices, it ties into the environment. So it's really a two birds, one stone kind of thing, and you can cater it to your interests in your community.
Okay, so I think that is all we have. So I think we're going to take some questions now. I'll stop screen share.
Hi, so Georgia and Chloe, I wanted to start with some questions that you've had over on the Global Campus page. So the first one is, what inspired you to start this movement?
So for me, I first got involved in year 9 in gun violence prevention when I along with Georgia, when I led my school's walkout after the Parkland shooting. And then from that, I just kind of started getting involved in more activism, and I started reading about it more on social media and different articles. And then I came across climate change, and then George and I both were like, we need to do something. So we started our club. After we started our club and I really started learning about it more, I was like, oh my God, like I need to do something more. That's when we kind of really got into it.
Yeah, I'd say for me, my family kind of has this thing where it's your duty to give back. And I think that was instilled from me from quite a young age. And then so I've been working on, like my parents have 2 schools in Malawi where it's part of Mary's Meals charity. So I'd run some fundraisers for that. And then in year 6, I did the Global Campus Challenge with North Anglia, and we did that on food deserts. And I think that was one of the first big initiatives I ran and helped run, and I think that really kicked it off. And then I think once I really started to get involved was with Chloe in year 9. She was saying with the gun violence, gun control walkout. And I think that's when it really took off. And I think that's when we both really started getting involved in activism and seeing how easy it is to make, you know, even small differences and also big differences. And then it kind of just grew and grew until we started Ecocircle, and we thought that was one of the best ways we can make a difference.
Yeah, and I think like something else for me, like George and I were talking about this other day, how climate change really resonates with different people differently. Like for Georgia, I know she loves nature and hiking, so that's why it really resonates with her. But for me, I'm more of like a human rights kind of person, I guess. So when I started learning about like environmental racism, gender inequalities, that's what really stuck with me. And like that's when I just became so passionate about it, where I was like, I need to do something.
Thank you. So that's the next question that we've got is, how effective do you think Ecocircle has been in our school, and how far have you been able to branch it out from school?
So I would say in school, we've been quite effective. We were actually originally known as Student Sustainability Team. So we did a lot of changes, like we banned plastic water bottles, we organized clothing swaps. We also presented to both like primary, middle, and high school just to kind of increase more at like education and awareness. We also worked with teachers to like help them like reduce printing and different things like that. So I would say it's definitely made a difference in our school community.
Yeah, and I'd say running our club, I think that helps get a lot more people involved. It also helps get a lot more brain power involved, because Chloe and I, we can obviously do a lot just us, but I think the more people we got involved, the bigger we were able to branch out and make a difference. And I think once we'd done a lot within our school, that's when we started to branch outside of our school, such as when we spoke at the British Consulate. And in the future, we want to start talking to businesses about business sustainability and all of that. So, and I think working with outside organizations such as Kind Earth Alliance and Illinois Youth Climate Movement, I think that's definitely grown our skills as environmental activists.
Yeah, for sure.
So the next questions are focused on plastic. We had quite a few questions about that on the Global Campus page. So the first one we've had is, how can we all reduce our single plastic use, particularly when we see it so much? For example, one of the places that was highlighted was fast food restaurants.
I'd say I don't think it's realistic to cut out all fast food, obviously. I love fast food. I would never tell you to stop doing that. But I think if you are going to go to fast food, that kind of single-use packaging is unavoidable. But especially when you get takeout, you can always ask for less packaging. So I think just requesting minimal packaging as possible, I think that's what's important if you're going to go for a place where single-use products are unavoidable. But I think if you can plan ahead, for example, if you don't want to, we go out during lunch and I don't like using the plastic water cup. So I always carry around my plastic water bottle. It can be a bit of a nuisance, but I think that actually cuts down on my plastic waste a lot.
Yeah, and I think like another thing, obviously this is a bit more work, but if you want to like get like a little pouch with like a reusable fork and knife or something, that can often help. Or like I was thinking for a straw. I also really like collapsible cups. I found that that's helped me a lot. Like you can order cups online that just like shrink down to like this big and then just throw them in your bag, even like a small like purse or whatever it fits. So I found that that helps me a lot. Just finding like small things.
So just like planning ahead, if you don't have the things already with you and you need to have single use, request like minimal packaging, minimal plastic. And then thirdly, I think just reusing some of the products. Obviously, you know, if you go to McDonald's, you can't reuse the fries container. But an example of like, you can reuse the containers from takeout restaurants, and that can be really good to, you know, pack with your packed lunch.
So Chloe and Georgia, our next question is, what impact does reducing our plastic use have on the economy?
So I think this ties into several things. I think going back to, you know, history, when the invention of Bakelite, I think that was very significant to helping the economy. But I think now we're in a position where as a society, we can have like an economically sustainable transition away from plastics, whether that be investing in bioplastics or whether that be investing in reusable products. So I think just as far as the plastic production side of this, when we're talking about the economy, I think it is a sustainable transition. And I think there'll be many things. It's not a case of getting rid of plastics and getting rid of the jobs that plastic has provided. I think it's a case of switching it to environmentally sustainable and economically sustainable alternatives that will provide these jobs.
And the final question linked to plastic is, how do we convince other people to make that change and to reduce their plastic use?
I found personally like linking it more to humans helps a lot, because like we've all seen like the pictures of the turtles with the plastic, but a lot of people do care about animals, don't get me wrong, but we all care about humans, we all care about ourselves. So I think talking especially about how plastic is going to impact humans is really like one of the biggest things that you can do, because it is going to impact humans. It's going to impact, for example, like whether we can eat fish, because if fish are swallowing microplastics, then there's going to be less fish that we can't eat, so the cost of fish is going to increase. Or just eating fish, we're going to be ingesting microplastics. So just like these plastics are going to impact humans no matter what, because of bioaccumulation and other things like that. So, and also like linking to the question before with the economy, plastic is expensive. Like on average, people spend $1,236 on plastic water bottles a year, versus you could switch to like one $20 water bottle and just spend that, or maybe two, and you spend $40 a year. So it's just like, it really is going to help save your wallet by cutting down on plastic.
Exactly. I think there are so many different ways, whether how it impacts them individually, as Chloe was saying, on their health or their wallet, or if they're more kind of globally minded and they don't necessarily care about the animals, but they care about the racial inequalities or the gender inequalities, as we were speaking about before.
So we've had a question in the chat, kind of links to one that we've had on Global Campus as well. Now, obviously, we've seen the warnings about the long-term effects of this environmental impact that we're having. And somebody on Global Campus pointed out there are still people that won't take action. As we've said, someone said in the chat as well, people aren't changing their habits. So how do we encourage people to take these issues seriously? How do we motivate people around us to be more sustainable without being negative, while doing it in a positive way?
I think showing people how easy it is to be sustainable is one of the best things you can do, because change is difficult for humans. We don't like big things. When people tell you you have to change everything and all that, people get scared and people run. So I think one of the best things you can do is just show them like the little things, and then eventually they'll kind of become more aware. And I've also found social media is a really good tool. So like for my mom, for example, who at first was not great with all of the climate change and like helping the environment stuff, I went on her Instagram and I followed like 10 good accounts. So then they started showing up on her feed, and since then she's gotten a lot better. So I think just like little things like that, just in everyday life, just kind of increasing their climate change awareness and throwing it in there now and again, but don't be rude about it. I found like sometimes I get really mad at my mom, it just doesn't help. So just being very kind and understanding that change is hard and like it's very valid, but change is also necessary.
Yeah, I think as Chloe was saying, environmental education is a very large thing, and just explaining to them the benefits of them becoming sustainable, as we were talking about before, whether it's for them personally or it's for the globe. I think that's a more positive way than, there's a lot of environmental organizations that are quite aggressive and they like to show, they kind of instill fear and like, oh, if you don't do this, all this bad stuff is going to happen. But I think what much more positive conversation to have is, if you do this, this is all the good stuff that's going to happen. And I think that's a much better way to move forward as a society.
We've also had a few questions in the chat and on Global Campus with regards to COVID-19. So the first question is, how do you think that COVID-19 has impacted the environment?
So I think we've seen a lot of benefits during COVID-19 with regards to the environment. Like we've seen animals return to new places, we've seen a decrease in emissions. And while this is all great, I don't think that the way we should see emissions is because of people dying, Like I feel like there are better ways to get to this end goal of reduced emissions than people dying because of a pandemic. But to me, in a way, it's hopeful, because I feel like now we know we can make systematic change. We can change and it is possible. So I think that's one of the things for me that I've kind of seen from it is like, okay, it's possible. Like there's a goal to reach towards and we can do it.
Yeah, as Chloe was saying, I don't think this is the best way for us to be in kind of moving towards environmental sustainability, because obviously right now we're certainly not economically sustainable. We're in the middle of a crisis. But this has definitely shown how quickly the earth can bounce back when we change our ways. For example, a lot of the waterways have cleaned up due to air pollution. The levels of like nitrous oxides in the air have significantly decreased due to less transportation, less pollution. So there's been a very quick turnaround with the environment. But I think to me, what's important to remember about this is, as Chloe was saying, this means that we can change and we do have such a large impact on the environment. Because obviously, once the economy goes back up and running again, I think this will go back to normal, how it was before as far as emissions goes. But I think we can slowly and sustainably transition into a more environmentally friendly way. I think you're muted.
Sorry. One of the questions we had on Global Campus was how has COVID-19 perhaps impacted your goals with the environment? And we've had a question in the chat as well to ask, how do you think we can now adapt to those sharing strategies that we've mentioned, so water fountains, clothes swaps, with restrictions that are in place?
I think it's a hard one because there are a lot of restrictions. And we also need to be mindful of COVID-19, and we don't want to put people who are at more risk at more risk. So I feel like it is quite a difficult one. But I found that using this time in a way to like change your habits is good, because like I'm not really in a rush as much now as I was before. So I'm kind of just home. So it's kind of a good time to change your own habits and help others change their habits, because typically when you're like, for example, using plastic, it's often when you're in a rush. So it's just kind of like now's a good time to develop a new mindset and a new, I guess, habit in a way. But it's a quite difficult, like with drinking fountains and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I do think now is a great time to educate yourself about how you can make a difference. Like even you guys being on a webinar, I think that's a great step forward and kind of utilizing the time we have during this pandemic. But I think definitely don't worry about using the single-use plastics in regards to health. You know, with the masks, the gloves, the hand sanitizers, I think at the moment we do need to prioritize our health and how that is. You know, we'll sort this out later on, which isn't a great way to think about it, but please don't worry about, you know, the plastic pollution when you're wearing a mask or gloves, because we need to take care of ourselves first.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the other questions we've had as well is obviously our schools often cater to a large age range. So what can we do to get younger children to do that will have an impact for the environment?
So for us, we've given a few presentations to the younger students, and typically just like making them quite interactive is helpful. So like we gave a presentation at the British School in Lincoln Park, actually. We were like asking them questions, really kind of getting them excited about making a change. And typically like younger kids, when an older kid tells them to do something, they typically want to do it. So like just really showing that you're excited, that you want to make a change, really just being passionate is what really speaks to these younger kids.
Definitely. I think passion is contagious, especially with younger children, and they are very receptive to things like this, and they do want to help and they do want to make a difference. And one example of how we had planned an initiative with the younger children that's interactive, we weren't able to because of COVID. We stopped going to school in person, but we were planning on doing a like Meatless Mondays competition where we were talking to them about the impact of the meat industry on the environment, and then they were going to make a song about climate change and environmental sustainability, and the winner of who made the best song was going to get a prize. So that's quite like, it's like a friendly competitive way to talk about something that can make a really good difference.
Yeah, adding on what George is saying, younger kids love competition. I mean, as do we, but like as young kids especially love competition.
Georgia and Chloe, the next question somebody's put in the chat is, what do we replace those plastic water bottles with? And I thought you could maybe talk us through some of the things that you've done at school in terms of banning the plastic water bottles.
So I would say first thing is a reusable water bottle. It's the best option. But if you need like a single use, we've been using boxed water, the brand, at our school, and they're quite sustainable. In fact, I believe they're carbon neutral. So even though they are like using trees to make their boxed water, they're also planting trees. So like finding, and there are a lot of good companies like that. I think one's called like Just Water. There are a few good ones that you can kind of switch to if you need single use.
Yeah, and boxed water is not a perfect alternative because it's made of this material that I think is called Tetra Pak, which is actually quite hard to recycle. So it's less about offering, don't use plastic water bottles, use boxed water instead, even though they are carbon neutral, so that's a lot better. It's more about saying, switch to using reusable water bottles, or, a good thing to offer in the canteen, which we have, is like these big water jugs that you can fill with like reusable cups that they have. That's a good way. So it's less about saying replace, this single-use thing with this single-use thing. It's more about change your mindset to something reusable. If one day you forget that reusable thing or you can't do that, you can have the boxed water. So it can also, people don't like change, as we were talking about before. So I think that it's easier for people to change just by that little incremental process.
Yeah, but like we also want to say like don't knock yourself down if you like sometimes use a plastic water bottle. Like don't give yourself too hard of a time because sometimes you need it. Like sometimes you're on the go and if it's hot out or whatever and you really need water, give yourself the water. But just like try to plan and bring a water bottle or something.
Exactly. It's just about kind of moving towards being sustainable. It's not going to happen overnight. It's a habit that you have to develop. And a good alternative as well is bioplastics. There are some controversy around bioplastics because in the age of like greenwashing, which is essentially when companies market themselves to appear sustainable, not all bioplastics are like created equal. So some bioplastics aren't actually biodegradable. Some of them are only part plant-based. So if you are going to go for bioplastics, it's not a perfect alternative, but certainly some companies actually have very sustainable products from bioplastics.
So the next couple of questions are linked to helping people change their habits. So how do we help people become more sustainable with what they're doing in their day-to-day lives? And how do you help people get into that mindset of reduce, reuse, recycle?
I would say kind reminders help. So like no one's gonna change overnight. Like you can't like give a presentation or tell someone about climate change and suddenly they're not going to be zero waste. Like that's just not how it works. But what you can do is help them kind of slowly change their habits. So whether, for me, one thing is I moved all of our reusable containers in my house next to our plastic bags, and now we rarely use a plastic bag because I moved them next to each other. So now my parents, when they open our cabinet to get a plastic bag, their reusable containers are sitting right in front of them. So I think it's little things like that that kind of help make the switch and helping to make it as easy and practical as possible. Because as humans, we like things that are practical. We like less work. So just kind of doing little things just to make it as easy for people as they can.
Definitely easy, and it can also be fun. Like, for example, someone in the chat said we can also use small plastic containers and we can plant the plants in that by making small holes for the extra water to flow out. So that's a good example of reusing a product in like a fun, crafty way, making it something new. So for example, in our club, we made a big jellyfish out of plastic bags. So that's quite like an artistic, fun way to reuse things and to recycle it into a new way. So it can be easy, but it can also be fun and interactive.
Yeah, and like adding on to that phrase, reduce, reuse, recycle, we like to think of it in that order. So first, reduce what you use. Second, reuse what you are using. And third, recycle it. Because recycling systems aren't perfect. There are a lot of issues, especially in America, I would say. I'm not completely sure what it's like in other countries with it. Like, I believe it's 1/5 of what we use that doesn't actually get recycled, or 1/5 of what we put in the recycling. So really just think of it in that order. First, reduce, then reuse, then recycle.
Guys, another question that we've had through on the chat is how do you stay motivated? So how do you motivate yourselves to continue raising awareness on this issue, even when there are people that are reluctant to make these changes?
I'd say just remind yourself about why you're doing it. Everyone has a different why, but I think that why has to be strong enough to, push you past all the hate you might get, or the setbacks you might have. Every day you're not certainly going to be motivated like, yeah, I want to save the planet. Oh yeah, I want to do all these great things. But you're still going to have to put the work in if you really want to make a difference. So I think it's just about holding on to that why and keeping that motivation. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days, but I think it's just about kind of remaining constant in why you want to help.
Yeah, and I think for me, a big thing is like the little moments where I kind of feel like, okay, I'm making a change, and just like remembering those moments help. Like, for example, at one of the strikes in Chicago in December, like I remember I was like on stage with like a few of my friends who were all running the strike. We were looking out at like the hundreds of people in front of us looking, and we were all kind of thinking like, wow, like all these people are here to help. All these people want to help. And like I can just kind of go back to that moment, and it's like that kind of gives me some motivation. So I think finding a moment that really gives you like the passion helps.
Definitely.
Girls, this is just a question from me, but do you have any advice for the other students in terms of now next steps they can take in getting started with this?
So if you want to start your own Ecocircle, the first thing I would do is send an email to George and I. We can type our emails in the chat, but they're also on the PowerPoint and in the toolkit that will be shared with you, but we will type them now. So I think that's like kind of the first step, and then we will send you a bunch more resources. So for next school year, you guys can really start your own Ecocircle. So, and then also just making small changes in your everyday life is a good next step.
Yeah, and over summer, I think is a great way to start preparing to set up your own Ecocircle at school, or setting it up even in your local community. Is, you know, you can start your own Ecocircle and just have it as an online thing to begin with, all these different things. And we're also going to share the kind of Ecocircle toolkit that we made, which will help you start your own Ecocircle. And also, when you email us, you don't immediately have to be signing up to make your own Ecocircle. Don't worry about that. Even if you just have any additional questions, any kind of concerns about before you start your own Ecocircle, to see if you really want to do it, all these kinds of things. But don't worry, just feel free to send.
You can make your Ecocircle like your own too. Like you don't need to follow exactly what we're saying. Like do what's suitable for your community. So really just kind of the name Ecocircle, and then it's up to you guys really to make it what you want to be.
And also here is our Instagram for Ecocircle. So if you want to follow us for any updates and all that, we just have, you know, some posts. A lot of it about is just environmental education, things about how Ecocircle is moving forward. So that could be a good way to have some updates if you'd like.
Yeah.
Because we have actually had another question through that's asking about paper use, how we can reduce that. And obviously, schools, we use a lot of paper. So what can we do to improve that?
So one thing I think is just printing double-sided. I noticed for a lot of our tests were being printed single-sided, and that in itself, just printing double-sided reduces half the amount of paper. So we spoke to teachers, and we kind of just brought up like maybe think a bit more before you print. Can things be uploaded online? Can you print double-sided? So I think just like working with the teachers at school and also the students at school to try and find other ways, such as like we use a thing called ManageBack to upload like different papers and stuff like that. So just can it be used online? Like does everyone need a copy of it? And if the answer is no, just helping people try and upload instead.
Yeah, definitely. On an individual scale, as Chloe was saying, just reflect about whether you really need to use it or whether you can have a digital copy of it. But on a larger scale, just kind of educating people about the impacts of deforestation, the impacts of, you know, paper use and all these things. And that can be done through assemblies, or as Chloe was saying, we spoke in a teacher meeting and talked about, you know, the impacts of paper and how they can reduce their paper usage. So.
Okay, thank you, girls.
So I think, do we have some time for more questions?
I think we have had one through actually that says, talks about the impact perhaps of like e-learning, like the benefits for that in terms of the environment.
So personally, I think like yes, it has been better, but we can also be in school and kind of take what we've learned from e-learning to help. So we've all seen pretty much everything has had to be uploaded online. So now we can carry that into school because we know everything can be uploaded online.
So yeah, I think this has just helped us show that we don't need to be constantly printing. Obviously, it is making us more dependent on electricity, and if you are getting your electricity from fossil fuel sources rather than renewable energy sources, that's not ideal. But as far as paper goes and shifting away from paper, yes, I do think this has been